Greetings from chess.com. Indian superstar Nihal Sarin defeated Magnus Carlsen recently. I'm going to break down that game to all of you and also explain some of the elements that helped Nihal Sarin to win the game. In addition to that, I will also start by covering another game that Nihal Sarin played and won against Magnus Carlsen. So this was a part of the Banter Blitz stream that Magnus did, and this happened in the month of May last year. So Nihal Sarin was white and he started with d4, and then we got a King's Indian defense, and Nihal opted for the h3 King's Indian. After a few moves, we reach a very different kind of structure where the position is switching from a normal King's Indian to a Maroczy bind hedgehog. So you can see that after a few moves we reach a traditional Maroczy bind where these two pawns are establishing a great control over this d5 square. And after a few moves, Magnus Carlsen decided to break in the center with d5, and the way Nihal Sarin dealt with this break was very effective. He played e5, did not touch the pawn on d5, and then after knight f e4 he just captured knight takes e4 after d takes e4. This pawn on e4 is actually blunting its own bishop. It's not a strength anymore, and the way Nihal Sarin handled this part of the game is very good. He played rook e d1, and then he wants to get knight e2 and knight c3 and slowly capture the pawn. This is one of the ideas. Like, there are many other ideas in this position. If you compare, the pawn on e5 is a strength for white because queen can come to f4, queen can come to f6, even a knight can be planted on f6. So after knight d3, knight e2, knight takes e5, queen takes d6, even knight f3 check doesn't help because the pawn is not really a strength. And after rook d2, queen b8, Nihal Sarin played knight c3, asking the question, who is going to support this pawn on e4? Here Magnus Carlsen played f5 to support the pawn, but that exposes his king to an extent. And then after rook d6, king f7, queen d4, he had this advantage. Then we reach another critical position after knight d5. After e takes d5, here Nihal Sarin makes a blunder. He played c takes d5. But queen takes d5 would have given him a winning chance. After king f8 there was rook into g6. But after c d5, Magnus was back into the game as he found rook e5, preventing d takes c6 because the queen is under attack. So the pawn is pinned. And here Nihal Sarin found the best move in the position. He played bishop f1. Because this bishop was not really doing anything, he got his bishop to f1, and now he wants to go with his bishop to c4. And then after queen e7, he played bishop to c4. And in this position, it was very important for Magnus Carlsen to find knight d4 or knight a5. But he played e3, and that was a blunder. He allowed a discovered check with d takes c6, and that was the end. And here Nihal Sarin won. Like, after king g7, rook d7, he just won the game. So this was the first game, and now I am coming to the second game that took place just a few days ago. In this game, Magnus Carlsen was white and Nihal Sarin was black, and this was a game that happened on 18th April. So after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, d3, Nihal Sarin decided to play d6. Now, the opening chosen by Nihal Sarin, e4, e5, I think it's one of the strongest openings to play against a player like Magnus Carlsen. So here you can already see that Nihal chooses stable openings and also brings up fresh ideas every time he plays. So after d3, d6, I have done some work here, and I'm going to reveal here that after c4, g6, h3, bg7, knight c3, castle, knight d7, bishop e3, this position was reached by Nihal Sarin. Like, he played a game on 2nd April against Erik Hansen. It was a bullet game, and here Nihal Sarin chose knight e7 in that game. After d4, Erik Hansen got a slight advantage. So after d4, f5, he could have increased his advantage with knight g5, but Erik Hansen played bishop d7 followed by d takes e5, which promised him a slight nagging edge. The game ended in a draw later. But when he faced Magnus Carlsen after bishop e3, he chose knight d4. Now my hunch is that he did revisit his games and improvised upon that game and came up with knight d4. I think it's a very strong move, and he's not shying away from the complications that arise after bishop into d4. So a remarkable move after e d4. Now if knight goes to e2, black plays c5 and establishes this pawn on d4 very well, and even knight b6 followed by b5 breaks are possible. So in this position, after bishop into d7, d takes c3, bishop into c8, c takes b2, black has a very good position. Now if you play bishop into b7, obviously there is b takes a1 is equal to queen, and it's huge material for black. So in this position, Magnus Carlsen played rook b1. Interestingly, this position happened in one of the games in Prague 2014, where black chose queen takes c8. The player who played black was Miturova, and player playing white was Pegzeli. This is according to my base. But here Nihal Sarin chose the strongest move, which is rook takes c8. And the idea is that if there is some sort of a break with c5, the rook on c8 comes handy because it's already ready to get into the game. So Nihal Sarin sensed that the c file could play an important role and captured with the rook. And then after d4, he played c5. Now the reason why Magnus is playing d4 is because he wants to capture this pawn on b2, and the bishop is protecting it. So by playing d4, he is shutting the eyes of this bishop, but that's only temporary. Now if not for d4, I don't see a way to get rid of this pawn. If you play something like queen b3, black can even play c5 and then cling on to that pawn on b2, which could become very dangerous later. So after d4, Nihal Sarin played c5 and rook takes b2 happened, and then c takes d4. Remember, in this game there was no increment, and you are playing Magnus Carlsen. You have to be strong and steady and have great faith in yourself, to be able to play such strong moves. After rook takes b7, he captured rook takes c4. Now if white captures this pawn on d4, black has this long-term initiative with rook takes c4 because he has two pawns on the queen side plus a very shaky knight, and the pawn on e4 is likely to fall if you move this knight from d4. Plus black has this deadly bishop. I think it's completely in black's control. So after rook takes b7, here Nihal Sarin played rook takes c4, and after queen b3 is attacking this rook on c8. But here is where everything changes. Queen b1 was interesting, queen e2 is also possible, but Magnus went for queen b3, and then after rook c3 he played queen a4. Now this is a very good moment to pause and see what you would do as black. This also shows that Nihal Sarin has a fine positional sense, has studied a lot of themes. So this theme is like you sacrifice in exchange for larger gains. So you use your active pieces to get a shattered pawn structure for your opponent. So that's what he does. So he transforms his activity into a structural advantage with rook takes f3, and this is long term because after rook takes f3, white has to take g takes f3. There is no choice, and you can see that this king is feeling lonely. There is nobody to protect the king, and then after queen g5 check followed by queen f4, bishop e5 is in the air, queen h2 mate is about to happen, so king g2 happened. And in this position Nihal Sarin repeats just to make sure that he at least has a draw. Sometimes if it's an increment game, you also get increment, so it's a good idea to repeat twice but not thrice, because repeating thrice would mean a draw. Repeat twice and then change your move. That's what Nihal does. He plays bishop e5, and now queen h2 mate is threatened. In this position, if Magnus had played rook h1, I think queen g5 followed by rook c8 would end the game in black's favor. So in the game, Magnus Carlsen played rook d1, then rook c8 happened, and after queen d7, you can see that the queen on f4 is such a beautiful piece, intending to attack but is also protecting a very vital f7 pawn. And after rook c2, queen e8, king g7, he was winning. But for all of you, I think this is a nice moment. If you are a fan of finding mate, then I think this is a good opportunity. There is a mate innate and all the moves are checks. So a good exercise for you. Take a moment to see what you would do as black. In this position, it's queen h2 check. That's the first move. After queen d7, queen h2, king f1, queen h1 check, and then another check with rook c2. Of course, you can't go king d3 because there is queen takes d1. So you have to interpose the rook with rook d2. Then there is d3 check, and after king takes d3, there is rook c3 followed by queen takes f3, and then king has to go to e1 or f1. In both cases, rook c1 followed by the mate is inevitable. So this is a nice way to end, but this is a nice rule that if you have a winning position and there are a lot of options, it is best to choose the one that you see really well and you are very certain of it, then you go for it. So that's what Nihal does. He keeps it simple and he knows that he's winning, and then he's a piece up and eventually won the game. So also in the last phase of the game, I really like how he is able to give a check. Let me go to that position. It's the kind of moves Nihal is known for. Rook e3 check. Now you can't really take the rook because there is bishop check followed by bishop takes a7, for example, king d3, bishop takes a7, king c3. Now you can see that this bishop is not of this color, but this pawn is not going anywhere because the bishop can easily protect the pawn, and it's an easy win. So game followed after king g4, he played rook g3 check, rook b3. The only thing he has to avoid is stalemates here, and there is no way white could get a stalemate, and after a few moves he was able to win. He even captured the rook on a7, and that's how Nihal Sarin defeated Magnus Carlsen. So in my opinion, Nihal is strong, I think, for a number of reasons. Like 5 reasons come to mind immediately. Number 1 is that he analyzes his games because he is improvising, and you see that he played that game against Erik Hansen. He had probably looked at it and then improvised and executed the next idea against his game against Magnus Carlsen. And also he has great positional sense. He knows how to get a fine balance between tactics and strategy, has a good positional sense. The move rook takes f3 shows that he has a good understanding of tactical themes, strategic themes, and he managed the time well. That was a game against Magnus Carlsen where there was no increment, and he's also an amazing bullet player, so he manages his time well, and he's a cool-headed person. I think when you look at his games and you look at his face, he's very calm, and he believes in himself and is able to execute those strong moves. And in addition to all these factors that I've mentioned, I think he has a very stable repertoire, which is keeping him strong. Like he's able to match moves and play at that level consistently because he has a very stable repertoire, and he's like very flexible. He can play e4, e5 one day, switch to Caro-Kann or knight off if necessary. So those are the points I think which make Nihal what he is, and I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Nihal Sarin. So those were the 5 points I mentioned. If you think there are some other points that you think makes Nihal Sarin OP, why you think he is strong, drop them in the comments. Do like the video, and do consider subscribing to our channel. I'll be back with another video soon. Until then, take care. Bye bye.